Let's talk about something that can be just so frustrating for parents, for therapists, for anyone really. You work incredibly hard to help someone get over a fear, you see amazing progress, you think you've cracked it, and then, out of nowhere, it comes roaring back. Well, it turns out this isn't a failure. Not at all. It's actually a feature of how our brains are wired. And if we can understand that wiring, that's the key to making progress actually stick.
So yeah, this is the big question, right? You've seen it happen. A kid who's finally sleeping without a nightlight is suddenly terrified of the dark again. A client who worked through a fear of dogs is anxious at the park. It can feel so demoralizing, like all that work was for nothing. But what if I told you that setback is totally predictable? That it's actually teaching us something profound about how learning and memory really work in the brain?
For a long time, the thinking on this was pretty straightforward. It was all about a process called habituation. The idea was you just face the scary thing over and over, and as long as nothing bad happens, your fear response just kind of gets tired and fades away. You get used to it. It makes a lot of intuitive sense, right? But it turns out that's not the whole story. The brain is doing something way more sophisticated and honestly, way more interesting.
And that brings us to this new framework, one that has totally changed how we think about things like exposure therapy. We've shifted from a model of trying to erase fear to a model of learning how to outcompete it. This whole concept is called inhibitory learning.
Now, the clinical term for this process is extinction. It sounds a little dramatic, but all it means is you're repeatedly presenting the thing that triggers the fear, let's say a dog, without the bad outcome, like a bite. This is the absolute engine that drives exposure therapy. But the real question is, how does that engine actually work under the hood?
Okay, this slide right here, this is probably the single most important idea we're going to talk about. This quote really captures the entire paradigm shift. That original fear memory, the one that says dog equals danger, it doesn't get deleted. It's not wiped from your brain's hard drive. It's still in there.
So if the fear isn't erased, then what is happening? Well, the brain is actually creating a brand new memory. It's building a safety memory, a new association that says, this dog in this situation is actually safe. So now the brain has these two competing pathways. You've got the old one screaming danger, and this new one whispering, it's okay. And the entire success of therapy really boils down to which path is stronger and which one is easier for the brain to find in the moment.
And this lays it out perfectly. The old idea on the left, erasure, that's like trying to delete a file forever. But the new idea, inhibitory learning, on the right, that's more like creating a new, better file and putting a giant shortcut to it on your desktop, while the old file just gets archived. So therapy becomes less about fighting the past and more about building a more powerful, more accessible present. Okay, so if that old fear memory is still just sitting in the archives, that finally explains our original mystery. It's why fears can pop back up. Let's look at the three main ways this happens. You can think of them as the three culprits that sneak into the archives and reactivate that old fear file. So, culprit number one is spontaneous recovery. That new safety memory, it can be a little fragile, and with the simple passage of time, if it isn't reinforced, it can fade. Number two is renewal. And this one is a biggie. That safety memory can get really attached to a specific context, like the therapist's office. The moment you see that dog in a brand new park, your brain can't find the safe in the office file and defaults back to the old general all dogs are scary file. And finally, there's reinstatement. A totally unrelated stressful event, a bad day at school, anything, can prime the brain for fear, basically making that old fear memory much easier to grab.
Now, if all that wasn't complicated enough, this whole process of learning what's safe gets a huge developmental twist. It turns out that a child's brain and a teenager's brain go about this whole fear versus safety competition in fundamentally different ways.
To really get this, we've got to meet two key players in the brain. First, you have the amygdala. Just think of it as the brain's super fast fear alarm. It's primitive, it's quick, it's all about reaction. Then you have the prefrontal cortex, or PFC. This is the brain's control tower. This is the part that does logic, reasoning, and it's supposed to tell the amygdala, hey, take a breath, this isn't actually a threat. So fear regulation is really all about the quality of the conversation between these two parts.
And this is where the science is just so wild. Researchers looked at what happens when that control tower gets activated. Check out the bar charts here. In teens and adults, when the control tower lights up, the fear alarm calms down. That's good regulation. But look what happens in children. When their control tower gets active, the amygdala actually gets more active. It's like their control tower is accidentally hitting the panic button instead of the off switch.
What this all means is that there's a huge developmental switch in how information flows. In young kids, the conversation is mostly bottom-up. The emotional fear alarm is basically shouting orders at a control tower that's still under construction. But as we move into adolescence, that whole system flips. It becomes top-down. The more mature control tower can now effectively send calming signals down to the fear alarm and regulate it.
This massive reorganization in the brain creates this really vulnerable window. Right around early to mid-adolescence, the brain is literally in between systems. The old bottom-up way is getting weaker, but the new top-down system isn't fully online and efficient yet. This creates what scientists call a peri-adolescent extinction deficit. It's a mouthful, but what it means is that for a temporary period, it is just neurobiologically harder for teens to learn and hold on to those new safety memories.
Now, this is not just cool brain trivia. This has massive real-world implications for how we actually help kids and teens. So let's take all this science and turn it into a practical strategy.
What this tells us is that a one-size-fits-all approach is doomed to fail. For little preschoolers who have a hard time telling safe from scary, we need to be super explicit and simple. For grade schoolers, their brains are getting better at this, so we can build more complex plans and start practicing in different places to fight that renewal effect we talked about. And for teens, who are right in that tough developmental window, we have to shift the goal. We have to normalize the return of fear, explain that their brain is literally under construction, and focus on the new skills they're learning, not just on getting their fear score down to 0.
So let's just boil this all down. What are the big takeaways? 1. Fear isn't erased, it's outcompeted by new safety learning. 2. Because of that, fear coming back is a normal, predictable part of the process. It's not a failure. 3, and this is so important, when a teen is struggling, it's not defiance. Their brain is going through a massive temporary rewiring that makes this kind of learning harder. And 4, all of this means our strategies have to be tailored to where the brain is at developmentally. You see, this science totally changes our job description. We're not fear erasers anymore. We're something way more powerful. We're architects of safety memories. Our goal is to help build new learning that's strong, that's flexible, and that's easy for the brain to find when it needs it most. So the question I want to leave you with is this. Knowing how the brain actually does this, how can we get better at designing experiences that build the most robust, lasting sense of safety for the young people in our lives?